My name is Jennifer Withrow, and I'm the head of exhibitions and publications at the McMichael. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. I will begin with a land acknowledgement. The McMichael Canadian Art Collection is located on the original lands of the Ojibwe and Anishinaabe people. It is uniquely situated along the Carrying Place Trail, which has historically provided an integral connection for Indigenous people between Ontario's Lakeshore and the Lake Simcoe Georgian Bay region. As an institution, the McMichael recognizes the importance of acknowledging the original territories of the Ojibwe and Anishinaabe First Nations people and other Indigenous nations. So maybe you're joining us this morning because you've already been to the art fair and you're curious about whether the things that caught your eye might have also caught the eyes of our executive director and chief curator. Or maybe you're headed to the art fair today or tomorrow and are looking for a field guide to the fair from those who know the ecosystem very, very well. In either instance, you are in the best of hands with our two panelists this morning, McMichael Executive Director Ian Dejardin and McMichael Chief Curator Sarah Milroy, two consummate experts on Canadian art and veterans of Art Toronto and art fairs internationally. Before we begin, I'll just say three quick things. Firstly, this talk is being recorded. So if right now you're thinking of a friend or family member who really should be here with us, I urge you to text them right now and have them join on because the fair is a limited engagement. The in-person fair closes end of day tomorrow, although there are online events that continue on through the following week. Secondly, we love to do these talks and make them free to access across Canada and beyond. If you're enjoying the virtual programs that we have been putting out over the last 2 years or so, and you are not already in our family of supporters, I hope you might consider joining in. Our members and supporters get access to even more special content, advance notice of all our goings on, and invitations to exclusive occasions. So to become a member or supporter of the McMichael, visit our website and click the big box that's marked join. Thirdly, and finally, before I hand over to our panelists, please visit us at Art Toronto. If you're going to the fair this weekend, we are at booth B02. It's up the escalator and to your left, you cannot miss us. We're featuring 4 gorgeous paintings by Toronto talent Margo Williamson, whose solo exhibition we are opening at McMichael next weekend, and the publication for which is hot off the presses, quite literally, and available in our shop and online as of today. And with that, I will yield the floor to Ian and Sarah. Take it away.
Okay, let me start just by welcoming everyone. This is going to be fun. It was certainly fun yesterday. We were very fortunate, and my gratitude to the Art Toronto people who allowed Sarah and me in early so that we could get a sneak preview of this year's fair. And it was lovely to be back, I have to say. There was a gap, of course, and it was great to have this opportunity. I have a quick government health warning. Jennifer has been extremely kind in calling me an expert on Canadian art. One thing about it is that Sarah Milroy was born into Canadian art and has been looking at it in depth since the cradle. My rebirth came a lot later, and I was trained in European art, of course, and discovered the error of my ways much later in life, and have been learning ever since. So this is always a huge pleasure for me. And I just add, best in fair, of course. Every single person who visits the fair is going to have their own idea of what is best in fair. We had an hour or two to rush round, and these were the things that jumped off the wall at us. But no doubt if we went again today, and maybe we will, different things would jump off the wall at us. So with that caveat, let's embark. This looks like a very attractive booth.
Something about it seems oddly familiar.
Yes.
We are just so thrilled. As Jen was saying, our Margo Williamson show is opening next weekend, and it's just an extraordinary talent in our midst in Toronto. She shows with White Cube Gallery in London and is exhibiting her work in Europe and is about to be presented in Hong Kong at Art Basel in Hong Kong. So she is a rising star, and we were very lucky to snag a bit of her stardust en passant when our chair of our foundation, Andrew Dunn, and his wife, Christine, acquired this beautiful work for our collection. And, you know, I feel like when people come into the fair and they see this work, you know, I do feel like it's kind of emblematic of our times. It's obviously an urban COVID bonfire. And, we are, with this fair happening, it really felt like the first time kind of coming out of hibernation into a kind of something I could scarcely remember, which was milling about. There was hugging. Someone shook my hand. I mean, it was it was really quite amazing. But what this painting brings to mind, really, I think, and why it's going to be such a treasure for our collection, is that kind of human need to gather together and around a bonfire, around a campfire. So, like, what could be better for the McMichael collection with its deep holdings of the group of 7 and its kind of woodsy vibe. So we're most grateful to have this in our collection. I do think that it's a star of the show, even if I am slightly biased. I don't know.
Yes, we are slightly biased there.
Slightly biased, but we also couldn't help but notice this fantastic piece, which really riffs on another one of, one of our artists from our collection that we have huge holdings of, which is Norval Morrisseau. And this project is by an artist collective, and of course Maria Hopfield is one of this number, and an extraordinary talent.
It is Native Art Department International.
Yes. Native Art Department. Yes, of which Maria Hopfield is a member. So I mean, it's wonderful to see the legacies of Norval Morrisseau continuing to be developed and thought through. And of course, what they're doing here is splicing Morrisseau works and putting them together. And the title really responds to the controversy around fakes in Morrisseau, which the replication of these works has been a kind of way in which settler culture has kind of created a brand of the woodland school, and the proliferation of these images, and then whether rightly or wrongly, has kind of defined a wider sense of cultural identity for woodland school artists. So anyway, I think their work is always witty and always brilliant. And I was very sad to see that these were all sold. So
I should just say, I mean, there's a very nice link with, of course, with Morrisseau, in that the reason he means such a lot to us is because he was an artist in residence at the McMichael way back in 1979, and worked in the Tom Thompson Shack, like another artist on this presentation later on.
Yes.
We'll see.
Yeah. So I had to stop at the Chief Henry Specks just because we have a couple of wonderful Henry Speck works in our collection as well, which we had up recently in our show Early Days. And what's so interesting, of course, he was a Kwakwaka. What's interesting about these watercolors to me is that they are depicting dance costumes. They're not depicting the animals themselves. And I think you can see here the little linen addenda to the back of the masks that would have, covered the dancer's neck and so on. So he's really making works that are really about regalia, and the color sense, the vibrancy of these things is just absolutely remarkable. And they keep, Sarah Macaulay, whose gallery Ceremonial is showing these works, keeps dropping them out in little increments. I don't know, she must have some wonderful treasury of Chief Henry Speck, and we must talk to her about that someday. But in the meantime, I very much enjoy the works that she's putting out. This I'm presuming is Kamogwe, who's a kind of Lord of the Sea type figure, and you see that he's always presented with gills and elements to his facial features that look like undersea creatures. So marvelous things. And this was a discovery for both of us, Ian. Oh
yeah, no, I just happened on this little thing. It's very small, it's kind of slightly bigger than an iPad, I suppose. Yeah. And it was such a pleasure to me, old-fashioned so-and-so that I am, just finding someone working with watercolor so brilliantly. We actually met the young artist, who's very young and super talented, Megan Kyak-Monteith. And this slide doesn't quite do it justice. It has far more depth than this. What struck me about it was actually something that's slightly lost in reproduction, which is the sheer beauty of the landscape behind, which is crepuscular in its tone.
That's the right word.
Yes, it's slightly spooky, actually. Yes. And that beautiful sky, it's a hint of gouache, I think, probably there, overall. And when we talked to Megan, she was saying that this was a record. She works with narrative. I mean, this is so fascinating to find a young artist working A, in watercolor, and B, with narrative, figurative work. And she was telling us this was something that she and her friends had done. It was they were playing Manhunt. Now, of course, I looked up Manhunt immediately because I'm British, and apparently Manhunt is a classic game that everyone spent their childhood playing. Well, I didn't.
It's too scary.
I didn't know what it was. But it turns out to be the opposite of hide and seek, in the sense that one person hides and the rest of you try and find them. And Megan said this was something they did at twilight. And she found it quite a spooky experience. And that's why you have that wonderful shadow of a hand, because everyone is handed out a flashlight, which is beautifully recorded in this. Very difficult to do this in watercolor, I might add. And the overall atmosphere is magical. I thought it was a wonderful thing. She's quite a discovery.
She is, and I just included a couple more of her watercolors here as well. She was her early childhood was in Pond Inlet. She now lives in Halifax, and is a graduate of the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design. But again, light, like this is midnight sun. Kids are running around playing, through the night, and that sense of the sun always low on the horizon, and the very particular qualities of Arctic light is really
the curve of the earth.
The curve of the earth.
I mean, it's global. It's extraordinary.
And then she made these, which Jen and I were wild about, this country food feast. And she's gone right down. It's made out of, I think it was some kind of polymer clay or Fimo or something like that. And hand painted, of course. And, all the replica soya sauce bottle and the little cubes of, she's recording the way in which the meat is cut into cubes, and then you turn the thing inside out and eat it like that. So that this is the technique. But these two parts, fit together with a magnet, and you can cut them with the ulu. And she's even very, very daintily stained the cardboard with paint to make it look like it's slightly soiled. So, I mean, this was unfortunately also sold before we got there. So I was also rats. But, the other artist of, extraordinary technique for watercolor is Joseph Tisiga. And this work that was at Bradley or Tascarin, just extraordinary. His narratives, you never really quite know, what is going on in Joseph's watercolors, because they're very dreamlike. Ian was allowing us to how his view is that the bear has clearly fallen out of his wheelchair.
It's perfectly obvious, and sustained a life-threatening injury, going far too fast down the hill, clearly. I mean,
It's deeply sad, though, when you see this, I mean, the way that it's painted. And also, if you know watercolor at all, you know how hard it is to be able to create both really soft, luminous veils of color, like he's doing on the right in this detail, or on the left, the, very, very precise spindles of the wheelchair. He's really, really a master in watercolor. And again, one often finds oneself puzzling over what's happening. It looks like there's some large hunk of meat that is bleeding onto the carpet in the background here, and some sort of votive experience going on in the front with this fellow with a strange black sort of shadowy figure at the right. But
it's very extraordinary.
You always feel like you like it's some dream that you have remember, and there's a sense of really, I used to watch a children's cartoon show called Fractured Fairy Tales when I was a child. It explains a lot, but the sense that things don't quite, like, you're trying to kind of make the narrative make sense, but it won't quite fit together. And he has an incredible knack for this uncanny.
Yeah, it isn't quite magic realism, and it isn't quite surrealism either. It's something very unique to him. But you're right. What I love about it is the technique. It's so brilliantly controlled.
Yeah, and neither is it quite menacing, nor is it quite fanciful. Like they balance right on the edge of how am I to take this? How am I to take this bleeding bear? I mean, it's deeply, the pathos is extraordinary, actually. But anyway, we love Joseph Tisiga's work, and I know that he recently had a big touring show that the Audain organized for him, and he continues to do wonderful things. But it was great to see him here. Now, Riopelle, I mean, I can't walk past a gorgeous big Riopelle painting without, taking note. And this particular one, Thai, 1966 at Canadian Fine Art, a good big size painting, really a classic work by this artist who is so responsible for ringing in seismic change in Quebec art, under the direction of Paul-Émile Bourdois, his teacher, with the other automatists, and of course the signing of the Refus Global, which was a kind of, casting off of a very repressive Catholic society towards a more secular society in Quebec, and just one of the great art movements in Canadian history, a deeply political movement in which art was fused to change. But, I took a couple of details just on my iPhone just to get into the glory of it all, because really, every mark, you feel his hand everywhere. And I suppose that's true of any abstract painter, except that, he smears color. I think you have to say, like no man alive. It's I'll
grant you that. Yes.
To be able to control the palette knife and what's going to happen with the color as he moves it. It's just in these lovely faceted shapes that he creates.
Yes, it's taken me a while, but this seems like a very kind of strong piece, and I prefer it because there's far more manipulation of the paint. I mean, the paint is always wonderfully thick and manipulated. I mean, these details are extraordinary. I'll say, I mean, this is absolute anathema. I should not say this, but hey, I'm in my own room and nobody can get at me. I sometimes wish he'd step away from the palette knife. Someone should have disarmed him a little. All of those, when he uses it as a sort of decorative thing, so that you have these waves of palette shaped shapes across a painting, I can do without it. But I'm living and learning. As I say, I'm a newbie, so I'll get there in the end, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, I mean, I just, this is my favorites of Riopelle are a little bit earlier, where they're brighter and there is more of a sense of shuddering light in the more of a stained glass feeling. Then they get darker and more clotted. But anyway, I thought this was, who's going to walk past this? It was
quite.
Really
I must say, I love Joan Mitchell as well. Sometimes I prefer Joan Mitchell.
Yeah, well, that was the Jen's clapping. That was the glorious show that came to the Archive of Ontario a few years ago. We all had a chance to ponder that legacy. So here's one of our old friends, Ian.
Oh, wow. No, well, I had to include this. I mean, there wasn't, as far as I'm aware, I didn't see any other David Milnes in the show this time. And it's lovely to see this from 1913. Milne was already well established. 1913, of course, is a significant date because of the Armory show in New York was in that year, and Milne was represented in that show. And, this is a sensational moment for Canadian art in a way, to think of David Milne alongside Matisse and Cézanne and all the rest of them in that extraordinary show, which changed, the whole landscape of art in North America, I think. And I like this one, actually. I like it more and more the more I look at it. It relates in many ways to our great masterpiece in our collection called Black. But this is, of course, in watercolor, another great watercolorist here. And I'm fascinated by the way, I'm always fascinated by the way David Milne uses color, because he worked to a system all his own. And you can never quite accept color entirely as being representational. I mean, clearly Black here, yes, does represent shadow, but in a funny kind of way, it also represents sort of absence of interest, I think, absence of value. And he uses the word values for his color system. And it does mean that I suspect this is not his wife, Patsy. I think this might be Patsy's aunt, with whom they stayed in West Saugerties around this time. I don't know. But again, she's wearing white, or is she? White just is the kind of literally polar opposite of black here. And so it represents the lightest area of the surface, but it doesn't necessarily mean she was wearing white. And if you look in the fascinating little reflection in the mirror, he uses pink there. And again, that doesn't mean the dress is pink. It means that pink is the tonal value that says what he wants it to say. And who is to know whether the green chiffonier was in fact green, or whether in fact that color is just the color that he chose to represent the light values on that particular.
Or whether Patsy's aunt had a bright orange face.
Yes, and one has to
Seems unlikely.
Sorry for poor Patsy. Patsy usually appears in his paintings with a blob of brown as her face. It doesn't.
I think that speaks volumes.
Much to conjugal affection, does it? But no, a wonderful piece. And I wanted to include this one because this is David Alexander, who is a very well established landscape artist in Canada, in his 70s now, I think. And 100-year comeback, I hadn't seen the title. When I was there, it didn't have a label. And so I didn't know what the title was. And I wonder if that's actually referring to what is screaming at me from this, which is, again, David Milne. David Alexander seems to be wearing his heart on his sleeve in this one, and his heart is very firmly in Boston Corners with David Milne at this date. And that's what this painting reminds me of. But it's very large, of course, in comparison to the smaller paintings that Milne painted. And actually, when you look closer, although the color scheme certainly, and that wonderful patch of water at the bottom, is very much kind of Milne in Boston Corners. Nonetheless, the actual technique and the handling of the paint is supremely assured and very beautifully done, and is not exactly like Milne at all. So this is no pastiche. This is a wonderful thing in its own right.
And a big scale of a work too.
Oh, yeah. Fantastic.
Yeah.
No, I thought it was a really strong piece. I thought it was lovely. Oh, and the opposite here, in the sense that, not in the opposite of strength, I might add. The point about this is Nakamura in the 1950s, doing his kind of geometry side of things, these parallel lines. The thing about this, though, you have to realize is that it's tiny. It's 9 inches by 6 inches. And yet it looks to me, it's so precise. I don't know how he created those wonderful ridges, but it also has this extraordinary surface to it, like it's been dug out of some 1,000-year-old emperor's tomb. I don't know how he achieved that. This tiny thing hangs in a little corner of Miriam Shields' booth, and it just sings. It dominates
marvelous.
the room. I think it's a marvel.
And there's a whole series of these, there's a whole series of these in this kind of lichen colors, through to a kind of an off-white, and some of them are vertical and some of them are horizontal. But then, he also is known more widely for more landscape-based things. And then he also made works that deal with mathematics, and, really, really a fascinating figure, and not as well known as he should be in the story of Canadian art, and someone that we have on our books.
Absolutely. And one of Painter's 11, but you wouldn't know, would you? He doesn't sort of vibe with them. It's like Fitzgerald with the group of 7. You kind of feel like he was always an individual.
Here's another one of Eric, of the ones that you picked. But, Coftree, really, like the last fair 2 years ago, there was a Coftree to die for as well. That was amazing. Yes, gallery in Oakville. And again, he's looking kind of better and better in a funny way over the years.
Yes. Well, I think you find there are 2 Coftrees in this presentation, and I plead guilty, because I thought he deserved 2, because I was blown away by him last time. It must have been in 2019, I suppose. I was at Art Toronto in person, and I remember coming out of Art Toronto then saying, who is this person? And again, he's working, at that particular time. I suppose with Michael Snow and people like Harold Town around. My goodness, those people could paint. I mean, Joyce Wieland, they could paint. And what I find fascinating about this is that it's 2 figures, and very often they are. I've discovered he uses the their sort of representational figurative approach and then turns it into an abstract in itself. I mean, it takes you a while to realize that there are two figures, and who knows what's going on, whether this is an intimate moment or an attempted murder. It's impossible to tell.
It's often hard to know.
Absolutely, but the colors and the surface, the way he's delving around the brush, it's beautiful.
Yeah,
I'm deeply impressed. I really am.
And here's the other one.
Oh,
you wanted to moonlit interior.
I know. And, you know, again, you kind of think this is pure abstraction. And then you start noticing the ghosts of chairs and furniture emerging. And it's all about the color and this idea of a moonlit interior, not just moonlight outside, but a moonlit interior and the special sense of light within walls that gives you. And he's interpreted into this utterly poetic canvas with the most wonderful detail. I mean, I took one or two details on my phone, which I don't suppose have made it into this presentation, but they are exquisite when you focus in on that. There is really ravishing. I am hugely impressed.
I mean, I think one of the things about, I'm just going to go back to this one. I think one of the things is that, you know, when we think of, we were looking at Nakamura a minute ago, you know, the Painter's 11, people kind of have it's almost like what's befallen the group of 7, because they're part of a group, you think, oh, Painter's 11 means this. And I think one of the great things about time going by is that those figures start to crack out of the little silos we've had them in, and we start to see them as individuals. Coftry too, part of the, you know, what we used to call in Toronto, the Isaacs All-Stars, you know, the kind of manly painting, you know, scene in Toronto, with all apologies to Joyce Wheeland, who had to put up with the gusts of testosterone all around her all the time. But, you know, Coftry kind of got lumped in with those other artists. And, you know, I think that his concerns, his figurative concerns were quite distinctive, and his way of handling the figure. And it's only as the years are going by and those kind of silos are you know, being kind of, are evaporating in his historical rearview mirror, that we're able to kind of see him for who he is. And he just, as I say, it just seems to get stronger and stronger as the years go by. We can see his contribution more clearly. Speaking of figure painting.
Yes, indeed.
Another one of our favorites at the McMichael.
Yes, for the same, but there's a similar reason in that as with Norval Morris. So Zachary Logan was an artist in resident working in the Tom Thomson shack. So is it 2 years ago now, I suppose? Or no, it's more than that.
Or 4. It would be 4. It was right before I came.
It was in 2017.
That's right. And he did, you know, we got, there are some wonderful works in our collection as a result of that period. And one of which was very much from this series, the Pool series. And because he was working in Tom Thomson's shack at the time and is, you know, hugely reverential of Tom Thomson's memory and influence, the big painting he did that we now have at the McMichael is dedicated to Tom Thomson, and the idea of a wildflower rising to the surface from Canoe Lake, plucked from Canoe Lake, a reference to Tom Thomson's drowning there. And that's what I find fascinating about this as well. He's put it levitate / fall, and it could almost be the pose looks to me like someone sinking into deep water.
It does.
And there's always this suggestion of, you know, the flowers, that somehow you're seeing this through a mist, through a veil, or through water, indeed, into deep water, black deep water. But Zachary Logan, one of the great flower painters
Absolutely.
of our times, uses them in such mysterious and beautiful ways and links it to the human figure. This is just a gorgeous image, and the composition is so perfectly balanced, and there's this sense of beauty and depth in his work that is really very different from anyone else I've ever encountered, frankly. I think it's a wonderful thing.
It's beautiful. And something else floating and sinking. Here, the wonderful Bill Burns. with his environmental thoughts.
Yes, I should just say to everyone listening, I mean, Sarah and I sort of turned left and right as we went in the door of Art Toronto, and we did our tour around separately. But both of us ended up firmly in front of Bill Burns, and both of us chose Bill Burns, and there are one or two others that we both chose as well.
Yes.
So that's a good sign. But surely there is a dotted line going straight back to Paul Klee with Bill Burns. The humor and the detail and the odd, I mean, the quirky humor, it has to be said. I seem to remember seeing small animals in safety harnesses. Was that Bill Burns?
Yes, yes. With little goggles to protect them from UV, and little waistcoats for squirrels to, emergency gear so they can be seen. I mean, it's a fabulous project. And he's been going at it for many, many years, and rethinking about our relationship to the natural world, of course, ultimately is what lies at the bottom of it all. Absolutely. And we're talking with Bill about possibly being with us at the McMichael when we have our Tom Thompson show coming up, because we're, of course, Thompson too is reconnoitering with nature and having his own experience of nature. And it seems like it's all part of my plan, Ian, to have a goat milking at the McMichael, which has been my ardent, passionate dream.
Well, yes, indeed.
Before I even came to the McMichael, I felt like there should be a petting zoo. But anyway, so far, Ian has managed to suppress this urge of mine. But
for everyone watching this, the petting zoo comes up an awful lot.
I will get a goat milking.
It's not something I've had management training about dealing with, but we'll get there in the end.
Animal husbandry.
Yeah.
So turning from the wonderfully silly yet deeply meaningful to the comic, but also deeply meaningful, Sunny Asu, Kwakwaka'wakw artist from British Columbia, obviously, and Coast Salish, appropriating the Coca-Cola logo to speak of the branding of Northwest Coast art in Western Canada and Canada more generally. These are two pieces that are at Equinox Gallery from the Urban Totem series 2006. These were like landmark works of Canadian art when they first came out. The breakfast cereal boxes, Lucky Beads, Bannock Pops, Kwakwaka'wakw, Frosted Treaty Flakes, Salmon Crisp, and so on, Potlatch Salmon Crisp, of course. He's using kind of traditional ovoid form designs to draw this figure of the parrot in the salmon loops. He's an artist who uses humor a lot, and you find that a lot in contemporary Indigenous art. I feel this ability to take the piss out of, as we say in England, out of settler culture by sort of, making fun of things. And of course, Kent Monkman is the supreme comic artist in this vein. But Sunny Asu, with the Coast Salish sign, of course, it's backlit, so it glows. And I think also in this context of Brian Youngin with the Nike sneakers. I mean, the first experience you have of those works by Youngin is like surprise and delight. There's a kind of a comic flair that happens in your brain, and then you start thinking, oh, what is he saying about the commodification of the sacred, and what's going on here, and branding and so on. So we are so blessed to have so many incredibly brilliant Indigenous artists in Canada, a number of them on display at this art fair. In fact, I felt there was a very strong sense of that presence throughout the fair. With some major works like Luke Parnell, Repeat the Chorus 3 Times, which are 3 drum shapes. And Luke, trained in traditional carving. And then I believe he went to OCAD and also to Emily Carr, if I'm not mistaken. And so he's kind of been trained from both sides of the cultural divide. Some of you in the audience might know Luke's large piece that he has installed at the National Gallery of planks of wood. It looks like the back of a longhouse. It starts very intensely colored black and this deep rusty red Northwest Coast designs. Then it goes through a few boards that are kind of progressively more whitewashed to obscure that imagery. And then the last few planks, the whitewashing starts to wash away, and we get back to the vibrancy of the original colors. So they're really about, moving through moving through trauma, he focuses on transformation narratives is what he said. It says in his art statement. And these 3 drum shapes one of them has this very curious backpack attached to it. So these are drums for traveling, and they're for traveling, I think, through time and culture. And inside them, when you look inside some of these boxes, the little box here on the right is the one that does not have, is the smallest of the 3. And this is the middle one, which has the backpack apparatus attached to it, but they contain these small carvings within them. So it's ultimately, I think it's a very mysterious piece. Ian and I were just, like sort of puzzling over it, but I think it does, carry this very strong sense. Obviously the backpack denotes traveling, but the sense of moving, they're small, medium, and large. They seem to be, moving back in time as well. And I think, Luke's work is really engaged with ideas of intergenerational knowledge and also intergenerational trauma. So they're very handsomely presented at the fair, and which should give pause for anyone who's visiting.
Well, I think the fact that there is that there are those figures inside,
yes,
and the backpack, because your first impression, there's more depth there, and there's a real message. It's a profound piece, I thought.
Yeah. And this was the showstopper for me. In Patel Brown's booth, Nepsidou, also working with motifs from Nicholas Galanin, who's a Tlingit artist from Alaska, who is another brilliant person in the Canadian art world that we see cropping up in many different kinds of exhibitions. And you can see the other Morisot piece that we looked at earlier over here as well, Morisot replica piece. Morisot fakes, double fakes. But of course, Ian, you're quite right. Your initial impulse is, I wouldn't mind wearing this wonderful thing. I must say, I found myself worrying about, an art fair and people stepping on this gorgeous thing as they wanted to get closer to it, because you do want to get closer to it and touch it. But it's this really curious hybrid between ceremonial attire and another kind of safety gear. This figure is completely covered up. The face has this, nothing is visible but the eyes. And, one wonders with Nepsidou always, like, what are these ceremonies that these extraordinary figures are preparing themselves for? So it's a deeply mysterious piece, but the fabrication is just spectacular. And I think the sense of a mashup of different cultures coming together that he handles so gracefully. But it is she's a queen of the ball. I think it's a wonderful piece. And a departed friend, Susanna Heller.
I was so impressed with this. You hung Susanna Heller at the Michael, one of her 9/11 pieces, which I was the first time I'd kind of encountered her. But this is such an impressive piece of painting. Again, like Graham Coftree, it's about the handling of paint, and it is absolutely masterly with this. And it was interesting that at the fair it was hung right next to Denise Tomasos, who is often playing with the same kind of use of lines to suggest some kind of grid, some kind of perspective, imposing a perspective on a piece. This at first sight looks like an entirely abstract piece, and then you realize it's anything but really. Newtown Creek, Brooklyn. There are tower blocks behind there, and the lines in the drawing, the white and black lines, strongly suggest a physical place. Meanwhile, again, it's the color that blows you away, and I would have to say the reproduction again cannot do justice to this piece. It is a thing of utter beauty.
It's so layered and there's so many textures in it. Yeah.
Blue on the bottom right.
She recently died several months ago, and she had, extraordinary painting career, but really one of the key people you think of when you think about city painting. She painted cities like these sprawling organisms that were just pulsing with life. And she made many, many paintings of New York as well as Brooklyn, and she made many of her best paintings from the top of the World Trade Center. The reason we were showing her at McMichael was because she made a whole suite of extraordinary works. And I think the most profound works that were made about 9/11 were made by Susanna Heller. And we showed a painting called Dark Cloud Explosion Absence, which looks like a sort of a thunderstorm, except you look into it and there's like bolts and bits of tape and gravel and all sorts of things and sort of embedded into the surface. And of course, it's capturing that apocalyptic moment of explosion. But whenever there is finally an exhibition of the city and Canadian art, Susanna Heller will be the star of the show, really, because she's just been pioneering this subject matter for so many years.
Mm-hmm.
Sandra Brewster, I think an artist that a lot of us are getting to know more and more in Toronto-based artist who had a wonderful show at the Art Gallery of Ontario a couple of years ago. And here's Minnie Ripperton, 5 octaves.
Wonderful. Extraordinary voice.
Extraordinary voice. And Sandra, this is a nice big piece. So it has a very large impact when you look at it. And Sandra is known for taking images, and if she's interested in the kind of shifting, transient capturing of a human being in a photographic image, and then she distresses the surfaces to put even more time into the surface of the picture. But this is really a stunner at Overcorper, who've just taken Sandra Brewster on into their stable of gallery artists, and what a smart move, because she's such a talent.
And Ripperton is Maya Rudolph's mother, I discovered recently.
Is that right?
Yes.
There you go. I didn't know that. Oh, wow. So this is not taken from the front, sadly. Apologies to Joanne Tod. I was standing slightly to one side, so this is a rectangular work. But, it had particular resonance for me. Joanne is also a person who's painted the city a lot, and she's made a lot of fabulous paintings of Toronto and fabulous paintings of like the hallways at Hart House and sort of canonical spaces in the city. And she can paint shiny linoleum like no woman alive. It's amazing. And this is, of course, the view of the Moore galleries at the Art Gallery of Ontario, with that marvelous daylight, filtering in from up above. And I think, Ian, both of us, we just discovered the other day that both of us, when we were first coming to Toronto, for me, it was in my teens to visit my sisters. And for you, it was when you were coming to research Painting Canada, I guess 12 years ago now, I guess.
Yeah, 12 years ago, yeah.
The only thing we knew about the city was that there was a Henry Moore gallery.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Right.
I remember, being 18 and getting in the subway and going down from, Yonge and Eglinton, where my sister lived, and finding the Art Gallery of Ontario and going and finding the space and having this extraordinary conversation with the guard, who was talking to me about guarding the space at night, and how the city light would come in through the roof and through the glass roof, and it would fall on these sculptures. And he said that it was like being in a dinosaur's graveyard.
Yeah.
And I've never forgot that. And I've always made a conversation of sort of a point of talking to the guards in museums ever since, because like nobody but the guards spends hours with the works of art.
That's right. They see it in all different lights.
They see it in all different lights, and they can think about it slowly through time and over weeks and weeks. So anyway, it's one of my favorite things to do, is to have those conversations. But anyway, this painting has a personal meaning for me. But one of the really astonishing things about it is that area that looks like a layer of gray paint that is painted on is in fact a layer of gauze. And the rest of the painting is behind it, separated by about an inch in depth. So when you walk up to it, you realize that is not a flat surface at all. It is stepped back in the middle.
Yeah, it's a box in the middle. It is extraordinary. I had no idea. I didn't believe you when you told me that. And it was only when I went up and looked at it from the side that I realized it was.
It's really to be marveled at. So anyway, it's wonderful to see Joanne at the fair, very senior, not senior in terms of years, but certainly senior in terms of established woman painter in Toronto, and, a great spirit.
And I'm delighted to say I met Joanne. This is one artist I actually met, because I was a judge with her. I was just brought in at the end with her and Mark Mayer on the Landscape Artist of the Year television show, which you were no doubt all glued to. But anyway, Joanne was tremendous fun.
Yes, she
and
is, and really knows how to look at paintings.
and deeply insightful. I also love the fact that she's brought that particular helmet head to the fore in front of that gauze. That's the one which is on the one hand one of his series of great helmet heads, but is also clearly evoking an atomic bomb, mushroom cloud, dinosaur bones indeed. It's marvelous.
No, it's a really great picture.
Great roof too, I have to say. I'm glad you can still see that wonderful architectural feature.
Arkin, yeah. So this was I've been seeing this name, Marita Katenga Banza. So this was the word that I was afraid I was not going to be able to pronounce without being able to see my screen, full disclosure. But this artist's work has been turning up a lot, and I have not seen a lot of it in the flesh. But there's a trio of these works in Gallery Hugh Charbonneau's space, and boy, they just scream off the wall. And for me, I mean, we were looking earlier at the works that were referring to Morisot, are to them, and they. To me, and I'm very interested in these kind of spidery, whiplashing lines. They speak to me of Janvier, and they speak to me of Morisot. And I think there is a sense, I mean, we had some Northwest Coast works within eyeshot, if you will, of a piece by Dwayne Linklater that was riffing off of Morisot in our gallery during early days. And this idea of the whiplashing lines that kind of tie everything together, everything is integrated. I mean, this is an artist who has, come to Canada from Congo in a completely different cultural setting, but this similar kind of sense of everything being knitted together and interwoven. I just think they're formally incredibly beautiful, and the color senses.
They're kind of reminding me of mapping as well. Oddly enough, it's reminding me very much of what's going on at the McMichael at the moment with Bonnie Devine, who's drawing a mural on our walls as we speak, and she's evoking the Carrying Place Trail. So she's kind of literally drawing kind of mapping elements, and this looks very much like that to me. But you're right, it's Alex Janvier, I think.
Yeah, and it's also, of course, we know that Jackson Pollock took his inspiration for his drip paintings from Navajo sand paintings and so on. So there is this language of abstraction that I think that Banza is engaging with, that is very complex.
Colors,
many different roots to it. Yeah, but I want to see more, definitely. And I can see these being very nice on the walls of the McMichael, I have to say. So
yeah, well, we're a bit biased that way, aren't we? Everything.
We'll take these. Unfortunately, someone else already did. So c'est la vie, but hopefully there's more where these came from. And then this major piece by Barry Ace in the fair, and it's a very heavy, serious work of art to be coming upon in an art fair setting. But all hail Art Toronto for taking on showing work that is challenging and complex and requires serious attention. People will give it that attention because it has a kind of presence that means you stop and think and look. And it's a kind of pulley system with a child's cradle board wrapped in linen on one side and a pile of rope on the other. And it goes back to a story that Barry Ace, Anishinaabe artist from Manitoulin, and a story about a residential school, children being taken to residential school from Manitoulin in the 1920s. There were two Jesuit schools on the mainland, one for the girls and one for the boys. And, obviously nothing but sorrow came from that. And you can see in the details of the linen, the images of those residential schools and of a mother and child soon to be parted on the other part of the cradle board. And then on the other side with the rope, there's little children's moccasins that are fashioned out of kind of wire mesh that are suspended in there. And really the story that lies underneath this is an extremely disturbing one, that the children were put in a wooden boat, which was towed to the mainland behind another vessel. And, then they would go into these schools and for all intents and purposes be lost to their parents. So, it's a very, very tough piece, a very moving piece. I think it's a major work of Canadian art. You can see another view of it here in more detail, but, hats off to Central Art Garage of Toronto for, managing to present something this powerful, important in this context. And Marie-Claire Blais, an artist that we've shown recently at the McMichael in an exhibition organized by Jessica Bradley for us, a wonderful curator who's also organizing Margo Williamson, which, as Jen mentioned, opens next weekend at the McMichael. But, she showed with us a number of beautiful cut fabric pieces that are kind of inhabit this sort of hybrid space between sculpture and painting. They're paintings that are then cut and draped. She's since started making these very ethereal abstractions. And what I think is so marvelous about them is the fact that the abstractions wrap, and the sides of the paintings also are part of the painting. So they have this kind of extra sculptural dimension, and they actually shed reflected color onto the wall around them. So they kind of emanate north, south, east, west, as well as being these kind of fathomless spaces that you can travel into in these gorgeous colors, which are always, with Marie-Claire Blais, it's always a very specific kind of color. You can always, even though she works very much between different kinds of media, the slightly synthetic pastels are really her thing, and it's very, very distinctive. And I thought these were two absolutely beautiful pieces in Blais Division, which is, of course, a wonderful gallery with spaces in both Montreal and Toronto. And then just because we were getting a little kooky, but by the end of our tour, we found these pieces by Kablusiak, who they're an artist based in Calgary, and using beadwork and other sorts of traditional techniques to make objects of care and memory. And here the furry ookpik and the plucked ookpik. So we had to explain to Ian, yesterday we had to explain about ookpiks, because I think it's something that you don't see much of in the United Kingdom. And
never heard of them.
We explained that every Canadian school child in my day, so we're going back a bit now, had ookpiks. And as I recall, it was like these little owl figures, and they were a kind of marketing of the idea of Inuit culture as being part of the modern Canada. And of course, there's many ironies to be unpacked there. But anyway, we all had ookpiks, and she's created a wonderful series. But I felt that the plucked ookpik, it was particularly poignant.
Yeah.
And I just felt we had to share it with you.
Well, I was very pleased that you chose this, because I didn't quite dare, partly because I had no idea what was going on.
Well, it was going to be this or the dead cat, but
well,
I thought,
thank God for that, for small mercies. But that's rabbit fur, I noticed on the Furby. It's actual rabbit fur. It's been dyed. So there's a considerable craft element to these, which I appreciate, because I'm a sort of textile person. I just love the way that they've achieved this plucked effect with those little bobbles of wool. I just think, I think they're wonderful. I love them.
Yeah, and as I said, she's an Inuvialuit artist, and she also does painting and drawing and other things as well. And I'm still learning about Kablusiak, but this was.
I can't imagine a small child going to school with the plucked ookpik nowadays. That could be a little traumatizing for everybody.
Exactly. But anyway, we wanted to end on a lighter note. But,
yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Well, we covered a lot of ground in 1 hour, but this leaves just the right amount of time for anyone in the Toronto area who wants to get to the fair. You must have a time ticket to go to the fair, so go online to arttoronto.ca. Thank you so much, Ian and Sarah, for sharing a few of your favorites from this fair. If you enjoyed this talk, please visit us at McMichael. We are open Tuesday to Sunday. Tickets are available on our website. We have 2 landmark exhibitions on right now: A Like Vision, which celebrates the centenary of the Group of 7, and Uninvited, which spotlights and celebrates Canadian women artists of the 20s, 30s, and 40s. Our Margo Williamson show opens next Saturday, November 6th. You can also support us by buying our books. We've been very, very busy over the past 2 years making great books about Canadian art. Some of them have gone into a second and third printing. So get these publications while they're hot. And visit us at Art Toronto. Remember, it's booth 502 up the escalator to the left. You can't miss us. Thanks very much for joining us once again, and we'll see you again soon.
See you all
Bye,
soon.
everyone.
Thanks, Ian. Thank you, Sarah.
slightly distracted because maybe I can ask Jen, do you know how I can remove the bar at the bottom of my screen that is giving me participants chat, Q&A, etc. Because it is precisely blocking the names of all the artists.
I think that each person who's watching this can change their particular orientation of where things are. And so if they put their view to gallery, that bar will disappear.
That would require everyone to do that, right?
Well,
not everyone can see what you're seeing, Sarah, so I think we're good.
Except that I can't see the names of the artists, and some of them, in some cases, I cannot properly pronounce them because they're a multidisciplinary group. But anyway, we can do our best. Maybe Jen, you can help me out.
yes, I will try.
So the name of this collective again, Jen.
So I've got,
It should be on the slide right below the images.
yes, indeed. So it is, to pronounce